I yelled to him and I said, Clarence, I'm hearing you now. I finally understand what you're saying.
And that calmed him.
Yep.
Somebody heard him.
Yep.
His cries.
Nobody else heard him. Well, you couldn't hear him because it was just noise.
You get out of the hospital and eventually you recuperate and you're back at the university?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you deal with that? You're back in this environment where you were in before, a very heady intellectual environment with your friends around, all non-believers, I assume.
Well, I wanted to show them Christian love, and they asked me to be the department chair. And so I became an administrator. And I did my best to take care of their needs and to love them and to get them the best raises I could possibly get and get them the equipment and the facilities and the materials that they were all hollering for. But they were not interested in my message, and in fact, some of the administrators over me told me to never, ever mention my experience or God or heaven or Jesus or anything, ever,
They thought you were loony. They thought you were making it up?
They despised it. They hated it.
You made them angry.
Yeah, I mean, I had people say to me, sidle up to me and says, you know, you don't really believe all that crap you've been saying. You know, you don't believe that, do you? You know, like, well, yeah. I mean, people, they don't want to accept it because if they were to accept it, then it would challenge the whole structure of their thinking. You know? So I felt more and more alienated from my colleagues, unfortunately, because it would seem, and I was also becoming more and more fascinated by the church, which the university is supposed to be a haven of light, but it was really the church that was the haven of light.
And which church at this point?
Well, I prayed, when I was recuperating from my illness, I prayed a lot to God, where would I go? And ultimately, I was talking to an artist on the telephone. I was not ambulatory. And she said, well, I go to this church down the street, and I asked my wife, and it turned out it was what I had been raised in, and it was only a mile away. And so I went there, and I saw it full of the angels and full of funky people trying to be better people, and I said, boy, this is for me.
And you had a Catholic nun, a friend, a student, who had prayed you into this. You never considered Catholicism. You went back to something that you were familiar with, or you felt called back to?
I did consider Catholicism. I went on, actually I went on several retreats with the Jesuits, and they said, basically to me, you're doing fine where you are, why don't you just stay where you are? I did look at Catholicism and consulted priests, and they didn't discourage me. They said, but
follow where God's taking you?
yeah, you're being very active in the church that you're in, doing the right thing. Why would you leave that and come do this? And I couldn't really explain that. I didn't feel called to do that.
So over the next 7 years, by 7 years later, you're a Protestant minister. You have a master's in divinity, and you decide to chuck all the university life and.
Yeah, that was hard because I'd worked so hard to become a tenured professor, and finally, as a tenured professor and as a chair, was in the gravy.
Sure.
It takes a while, but you know, I was doing real well. You know,
and your wife's an attorney. How did she feel about that?
Well, she thought I was absolutely out of my mind.
Yeah.
You know, she was saying, look, if you want to be like a minister, you can go get a church and do it on the weekend and keep your job. You know, nobody's stopping you. You can play minister if you want. And I said, no, I want my whole life to be about the church, about God's people. And she said, well, you're doing ministry at the university. And I said, yeah, I know, but I can't talk about Jesus, I can't talk about God. I mean, that's not what I had in mind. I want to give my life to the church. So I went to seminary for 3 years and became ordained, and I've been at this church for 9.5 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you feel like now that if God would review your life these last 9.5 years, the last year since 1985 even, that you would be a disappointment to him again?
No. I don't want to sound presumptuous. I haven't done a perfect job. I've made a lot of mistakes. There's a few things I'd be embarrassed about.
You're still making a few mistakes then.
Yeah, I ain't no saint. But I feel like, see, all God asks of us, I know this absolutely, God asks, just do our best. God's not saying be perfect, change the world, you know, just do your best. And God knows that I've done that. And so all I need to hear from Jesus is, well done, good and faithful servant. Mm-hmm. Not, you've been a success, not, wow, you know, you really had a big impact or anything. Well, I was faithful and I did my best. That's all he wants from us.
What would you tell any of the intellectuals that might be listening and are closing their hearts to this message, or closing their minds to this message because they're not allowing their hearts to speak to them? How can they begin to grasp what you're saying? Because it's a very simple message, and sometimes people want the bells and whistles and something just enormous to happen.
Well, these, you know, intellectual people tend to live in the rational mind and not the experiential mind. But I would say that if you prayed to God the simplest possible prayer, said, God, you know, in the name of Jesus, I would like to experience you in my life. I would like to know you or know if you're real. If they gave that a chance, in peace and quiet, in sincerity, that God would not disappoint them. So I would challenge them, if they consider themselves to be of any intellectual integrity or not, try it and find out for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Because the danger, the truth of the danger out there, and that's what you experience, I think that's what's so powerful, is that the devil and the evil spirits are out there prowling the earth, as we've read in the Bible.
Like a roaring lion.
Like a roaring lion. And people don't like to believe that, don't like to talk about it, dismiss it as something that's only in horror movies.
One of the greatest success of the evil one is to convince us all that it's not real, and it's all a big game. And unfortunately, it's too real, and it's something that needs to be taken seriously. I don't like to, I like to fill myself up with the light of Christ, and that takes care of my problem with evil. Mm-hmm. But you bump into it every once in a while, you know, and you got to face the reality of it.
Even after you've accepted Christ.
Yeah.
But for those who haven't accepted him yet, they have to be aware that if they haven't accepted him, then they're being led by another force.
Absolutely. They don't even know how much he has power over them, you know.
It doesn't matter what you've done, God is always willing to take you back. Is that not true? You're like the prodigal son.
Right. It's the incredible thing is people, well, I'm too bad, I've done too many wicked things or something like that. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I have a man that I'm working with who's on death row in Ohio, and he did a really bad thing. You don't want to know about it.